On the morning of May 30, 1626, at around 10 o'clock, an unidentified, colossal explosion tore through Beijing, the capital of the Ming dynasty. The blast instantly wiped out the heart of the city. Thousands of buildings were obliterated, and an untold number of people simply vanished where they stood. Above the city, a mushroom-shaped cloud of unknown origin surged into the sky. At the same moment, roof tiles, chunks of stone, and pieces of human bodies rained down from above. Within a radius of several hundred meters from the epicenter, everything was completely erased. In a single day, nearly 20,000 people went missing. But the most disturbing part wasn't the death toll. There was not a single trace at the scene that could explain what had caused the explosion. No fire. No burn marks of any kind. What investigators found on the streets was deeply unsettling: men, women, children, and the elderly, all stripped completely naked. Their clothing and jewelry were later discovered in a heap on a mountainside nearly 30 miles away. One woman who had been riding inside a sedan chair was found still seated calmly inside. The chair was completely intact. But every stitch of clothing on her body had vanished without a trace. Shortly after, strange and inexplicable phenomena began appearing in the skies over Beijing. Days before the explosion, a series of baffling events had already been unfolding across the city. On May 13, at a time when early summer heat should have arrived, Beijing was suddenly frozen. A severe frost blanketed the entire city overnight. Fields and rice paddies that hadn't even finished planting were completely destroyed in a single day. Crops that had been growing just hours before were reduced to rot. On May 19, a strange cloud, one that blended deep red and violet, slowly rose in the northern sky. Its shape was circular, almost like a giant disk. It drifted through the center of the city and lingered there for well over half a day. Even after sunset, the cloud refused to disappear. Those who witnessed it that day later wrote that the cloud seemed to be waiting, as if it was anticipating something. On May 21, near the Northern Observatory, a round ball of glowing blue-green light crossed the night sky. About the size of a bucket, it drifted silently without making a sound. People initially dismissed it as a shooting star, but the same glowing orb appeared in the exact same location 3 times in a row. Then, on May 27 and 28, just 2 days before the explosion, alternating red and black clouds were observed over Beijing. What made them unusual wasn't just their color. These clouds arrived in a fixed shape, remained motionless for a set period of time, and then disappeared in complete silence without drifting apart. These strange weather phenomena are consistently documented across multiple historical records, including the Baijiu Ilu and the Tianbian Jiaosu. On the day of the explosion, Beijing became a living nightmare. Around 9 in the morning on May 30, a deafening roar suddenly erupted through the city center. The source of the blast was traced to an area called Wanggongchang, located to the southwest of Beijing. At first, people thought it was an earthquake, but the ground never shook. Instead, a thick haze spread across the entire city, accompanied by a strange metallic smell. People froze in their tracks, unable to make sense of what was happening. Then, roughly an hour later, a catastrophic explosion detonated across the Wanggongchang area. The ground zero of the blast vanished in an instant. The surrounding neighborhoods were swept away as if they had been surgically removed. The sky to the west turned red. A nearby temple was lifted into the air and scattered in every direction. Rocks flew like cannonballs. The skin of people nearby was reportedly stripped off like paper in the wind. The workers at facilities near Wanggongchang simply ceased to exist. Soldiers stationed in the area were found in pieces, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. Those who survived were found wandering the streets, completely naked, in a state of total shock. At the time, Emperor Tianqi was in the middle of preparing a meal inside the Forbidden City. Suddenly, tiles and stone fragments rained into the imperial palace. One palace attendant was killed on the spot, struck by flying debris from a shattered table. The shockwave radiated outward in every direction. Most of the buildings inside the inner city walls were obliterated. Even the imperial palace, located nearly 2 miles from the explosion, suffered significant damage. As for the Wanggongchang area itself, it was, in every sense of the phrase, erased from the map. Historical records from that day include passages like these. above Chang'an Avenue, heads, arms, and legs fell like rain. One woman was seated inside her sedan chair. Her clothes and earrings were gone. The chair itself was untouched. These accounts are not folklore. They appear consistently across the official documents of the day, including the Ming Court Gazette known as the Dibao, as well as the Li Kewin and the Shizong Lu records compiled by the most respected scholars of the era. But the horror did not end with the explosion itself. Shortly after the blast, a thick, blood-red smoke began spreading through the streets of Beijing. People collapsed without warning, clutching their ears and screaming. Some of them began bleeding from their eyes and nose, and died where they fell. The sky turned red, and strange unidentified particles were observed falling through it, rough in texture like coal, gleaming like metal shards, yet crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. These particles were found not just near the epicenter but throughout the city center. Reports indicate that some people who came into contact with them suffered severe skin burns, and in other cases, tissue death. Contemporary accounts describe the scene in vivid detail. Roof tiles and bricks flew into the air from every direction. The streets ran with blood, not rainwater. Trees had not burned, yet their trunks were blackened and twisted. Bricks and tiles launched into the sky and came crashing back down. Streets and homes became indistinguishable from one another. The bodies found across the city were nearly unidentifiable. Most were fragmented, missing limbs, or in some cases, only missing their heads. Along Chang'an Avenue, investigators reportedly found rows of headless corpses. Official death counts put the toll at around 20,000. But factoring in those who were never recorded, historians estimate the actual number may have been more than twice that. In the aftermath, the Ming Emperor dispatched an investigative team to determine the cause. Dozens of officials were sent into the Wangongchang area. But the scene offered nothing. According to records, the landscape had been so completely transformed that investigators couldn't even tell what had originally stood there. However, one thing was noted: a massive imperial armory had once been located in the area, and it was completely gone. The Ming court initially assumed it was a simple gunpowder accident. But the investigators on the ground couldn't accept that explanation. If the armory had exploded, there should have been fire. Massive fire. Yet across the entire Wangongchang district, not a single trace of burning was found anywhere. Additionally, the explosion had reportedly produced a towering mushroom cloud and an earth-shaking roar, characteristics more consistent with a modern nuclear detonation than a 17th-century gunpowder blast. Contemporary scholars have determined that the destructive force involved far exceeded anything a gunpowder stockpile of that era could have produced. Furthermore, thousands of buildings had been reduced to rubble, yet not one stone pillar was left standing. Historians have described this as resembling the work of some external, overwhelming force that had selectively removed the area, not simply destroyed it. A second hypothesis was earthquake. But this, too, was quickly dismissed. Even without seismographic equipment, the surviving written accounts and eyewitness testimonies make clear the ground never shook. Not even once. The third hypothesis was a meteor strike. If a massive object had fallen from the sky, the impact would have generated extreme heat and shockwaves, potentially creating the mushroom cloud and wiping out the city. On the surface, this is the most plausible-sounding explanation. But there was no meteor. No fragments. No crater. Not a single piece of physical evidence suggesting something fell from above. What makes this even more remarkable is that by the late 16th century, Western astronomy had already been introduced into the Ming court. The Imperial Observatory was equipped with a variety of precision instruments, and all astronomical events were carefully recorded. There is no entry, not one, recording the approach or fall of a meteor on that day. This left some with a darker conclusion, that whatever struck Beijing in 1626 was not natural. Some mystics and conspiracy theorists have suggested the event was a targeted attack, that something passed over Beijing and deliberately struck the area. At the center of these theories is the idea of an extraterrestrial intelligence. And the historical records do contain passages that seem to support this idea. Among the surviving documents are accounts of only heads were missing, the rest of the bodies remained intact. Just before the explosion, two spheres of red and violet light appeared hovering overhead. The color of the clouds was unlike anything ever seen. These are not legends or myths. They appear in official government bulletins and verified historical records written by the most credible scholars of the time. So what do you think really happened? A mysterious explosion that obliterated an entire district of a city in a single moment. 400 years later, it remains one of the most inexplicable disaster events in recorded history. Nuclear energy is among the most efficient power sources humanity has ever developed, far more powerful per unit of fuel than coal, oil, or natural gas. The first human-built nuclear reactor was constructed in the United States roughly 80 years ago. But despite 8 decades of progress in nuclear technology, challenges remain, particularly the safe disposal of nuclear waste and the prevention of radiation leaks. These are problems we still haven't fully solved. So imagine the shock in 1973, when a natural uranium mine in Oklo, Gabon, in Central Africa, was found to contain what appeared to be an ancient nuclear reactor, one that operated for hundreds of thousands of years without leaking a single trace of radiation. It began when a French scientist analyzing uranium ore from the Oklo mine noticed something puzzling. A specific isotopic component of the ore was 0.003% below the standard baseline found in all known uranium deposits worldwide. In plain terms, the ore had already been used. Something had consumed part of it. The French government launched an immediate investigation. Their findings were stunning. The uranium in this mine had undergone nuclear fission approximately 2 billion years ago. The International Atomic Energy Agency later confirmed officially that the uranium at Oklo had been sustaining a chain reaction for roughly 300,000 years. Here's why that's so hard to accept. A sustained nuclear chain reaction doesn't just happen. The conditions required are extraordinarily precise. When a uranium nucleus absorbs a neutron and splits, it releases additional neutrons. Those neutrons must then collide with other uranium atoms at exactly the right speed to trigger further fission. If the temperature isn't maintained, or if neutron velocity is off even slightly, the reaction either halts completely or spirals into an explosion. In a modern nuclear facility, all of this is carefully managed by a reactor. The idea that nature accomplished this spontaneously and kept it running for hundreds of thousands of years strikes many scientists as deeply improbable. Some researchers have argued that the Oklo site is simply a naturally occurring nuclear reactor. Their reasoning: no artificial structure was found at the site, and the groundwater present in the mine may have served as a natural neutron moderator, slowing the neutrons to the correct speed. But other scientists pushed back hard. For water to regulate a nuclear chain reaction properly, the flow of water into the mine would need to be perfectly consistent throughout the entire structure. That is not something that can happen naturally. And even granting all of that, the idea that this system operated for hundreds of thousands of years without a single radioactive leak, and somehow disposed of its own waste internally, is simply not something we can explain with conventional science. Their conclusion: Oklo was a deliberately engineered ancient reactor, built by a civilization we have no record of. What do you think? Could it be possible that 2 billion years ago, an intelligent species other than humanity walked this planet and left behind the remnants of their technology? In 2006, a remarkable geological discovery was made in the Anatolia region of Turkey. Russian geologist Dr. Alexander Koltopin was surveying the rock formations of the Phrygia Valley when he noticed something that stopped him cold: fossilized tracks that looked exactly like the ruts left by wheeled vehicles. At first, as Dr. Koltopin's team drove deeper into the valley to conduct their survey, they didn't notice anything unusual. The path appeared to be an ordinary road. But as they continued, the road gradually deepened beneath them, splitting into 2 distinct grooves that grew progressively deeper until it became impossible to drive any further. The team stopped and examined the tracks on foot. What they found: tire width impressions measuring about 10 inches across. Depth, up to 3 feet in places. The spacing between the 2 grooves was perfectly consistent, no matter where they measured. Too geometric to dismiss as natural erosion. Too precise to be accidental. And then came the bombshell: the rock layer containing these tracks was volcanic tuff, dated to approximately 14 million years ago. Volcanic tuff dating is considered highly reliable. Yet according to our entire recorded history, human civilization is only a few thousand years old. The wheel was invented only a few thousand years ago at most. Dr. Koltopin's interpretation: the ancient drivers of these vehicles were traveling across wet mud. Over time, the tracks hardened and fossilized, the same process by which dinosaur footprints are preserved. He scoured the available geological literature for any explanation. The only reference he found was a graduate thesis from a Turkish university that briefly mentioned these formations, calling them simply wagon ruts, without any further explanation or analysis. He also argued that the tracks could not have been made by wagons. If a wagon had passed through, you'd expect to find footprints, from animals or humans, alongside it. Additionally, the side walls of the grooves show consistent scraping marks that are more consistent with the protruding axle housing of a motorized vehicle than with a wagon wheel. Whether this was a wagon or something more advanced may be beside the point. If Dr. Koltopin is correct that these tracks were made by a different species entirely, one that lived on Earth 14 million years ago, then the distinction between wagon and car matters very little. What do you think? Could these fossilized grooves really be the tire tracks of vehicles driven by an ancient intelligence that predated humanity by millions of years? In 2018, a viral incident in the United States sparked widespread debate, all because of a single photograph uploaded to the internet. A popular mystery channel called UFO Mania posted a video claiming to have discovered a UFO in a satellite image from Google Earth. The video described what the channel had supposedly received. I recently got a tip from a viewer. An unidentified object has been spotted above Lake George. The object is circular in shape and has a strange pattern engraved at its center. It looks exactly like a UFO monitoring the Earth from above. What did you think when you first saw the image? A weather balloon? A genuine extraterrestrial craft? The image spread rapidly across online communities. It eventually made it into actual news articles, and the story took on a life of its own. So what was the public reaction? There's no way. If something that big appeared over a mountain, somebody would have seen it. There's not a single eyewitness report. People focused their attention on possible technical glitches and rendering errors. The theory that gained the most traction? A water droplet. It's a water drop. There's water on the camera lens. Once you heard that explanation, you could almost see it: the circular shape, the blue tones matching the background, the white inverted reflection, the way the mountain's contours seemed to flow naturally around it. If it was a water drop, the UFO was simply the distorted reflection of the mountain behind it. Pretty anticlimactic. But here's the twist: it wasn't even a water droplet. The real answer was even more mundane. It was a Google photosphere icon. On Android devices, when Google Earth's 360-degree panorama feature is activated, a Google photosphere logo appears as part of the interface. The object in the image was identical to that logo. Experts concluded that the image was the result of a simple rendering artifact, a visual glitch in the mapping software. So, a conspiracy theorist mistook a Google watermark for an alien spacecraft, and it made the evening news. In 1997, a New Zealand mystery publication called Unknown History published a startling article with a provocative headline. Is this an undiscovered ancient site in New Zealand, or evidence of a lost civilization hidden from history? The author was Barry Brailsford, a British archaeologist who had been exploring the Kaimanawa forest, located south of Lake Taupo in New Zealand. During his survey, he claimed to have stumbled upon a stone structure that appeared to have been deliberately constructed. He published a photograph alongside his article. At first glance, it's obscured by leaves and moss. But look closely, and there's no question this is a man-made structure. The surface of the stone is smooth, as if carved by human hands. The blocks are arranged in a symmetrical pattern. And according to dating analysis, this structure was formed somewhere between 5,000 and 330,000 years ago. 5,000 years ago places the structure in the era of the Mesopotamian civilizations. 330,000 years ago, there were no anatomically modern humans on Earth. Yet according to New Zealand's established historical record, the first people to settle the islands were the Maori, who arrived approximately 800 years ago, around the 13th or 14th century. An artificial structure, potentially older than recorded New Zealand history by thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. Even the most conservative dating estimate defied conventional explanation. Scholars and researchers weighed in with competing theories. The most widely supported hypothesis: a historical error. Perhaps New Zealand's first settlers were not the Maori, but an older group, the Waitaha, who may have arrived thousands of years earlier. Proponents also pointed out that similar structural characteristics can be found at ancient sites around the world, suggesting the wall might link New Zealand to ancient Egyptian civilization. New Zealand's academic establishment, including historians, anthropologists, and the Maori Cultural Preservation Office, pushed back firmly, denying any historical basis for the Waitaha and calling for the forced closure of websites spreading what they considered misinformation. A second hypothesis took a scientific approach. Some geologists argued that the structure is a type of volcanic rock known as ignimbrite, and that ancient rock formations of this type can cool into block-like shapes that bear a striking resemblance to human construction. In other words, nature, not people, created the blocks. No definitive answer has emerged. The origin of the Kaimanawa Wall remains a mystery. What do you think? Is this another piece of evidence for a lost advanced civilization, or just a very convincing rock formation? In 1995, an unusual story out of the United States captured the attention of mystery communities around the world. It came to be known as the disappearance of the time machine builder. The subject of the story was, surprisingly, a 21-year-old college student named Mike Markham, an electrical engineering major at Missouri University of Science and Technology. By all accounts, he was an unusually inventive and unconventional thinker, even by the standards of his peers. Mike had turned his backyard into a personal lab, where he regularly conducted electrical experiments using whatever equipment he could find. Then one day, while working on a homemade device built from a CD player, a contraption that generates a climbing arc of plasma known as a Jacob's ladder, he witnessed something he couldn't explain. For context, a Jacob's ladder is a device in which a voltage difference between two electrodes causes an arc of plasma to rise visually between them, like a ladder being climbed. Mike's device was generating intense heat, leaving thick scorch marks on the floor beneath it, and producing enormous swirling arcs. Out of curiosity, he tossed a metal screw into the plasma field. The screw disappeared. It vanished for approximately half a second, then reappeared several feet away. He repeated the experiment multiple times. The result was the same. Eventually, the CD laser burned out from the heat. But Mike wasn't done. He decided to build a time machine. Or at the very least, he wanted to rebuild the device at a much larger scale, using bigger transformers. There was one problem: he had no money. So he stole 6 300-pound transformers from a local power station in Missouri. The theft triggered a major power outage across several city blocks that same evening. Police used the outage as a trail to follow. Mike was arrested at his home just 2 days later, on January 29, 1995. Police reports noted, "We initially believed someone was deliberately causing outages as an act of sabotage. When we found the suspect, he was in the middle of some kind of unusual scientific experiment. He told us he was building a time machine." Mike served about a year in jail on theft charges. After his release in 1996, he was invited onto the nationally syndicated radio program The Art Bell Show as a guest. He described his experiments on air, promised to conduct all future research within the bounds of the law, and publicly disclosed his phone number, saying he needed funding. Hundreds of listeners called in. He received financial contributions and new ideas from people across the country. Thank you for your support. This time, rather than a screw, I plan to build a large enough machine that I can step inside it myself. About a year later, Mike was invited back onto the Art Bell Show for a second interview. Host, in your last interview, you said you were going to build a time machine that a human being could actually use. What's the current status of development? Mike, the device has been built. I'm currently running thorough safety tests before I attempt it myself. I think it could happen within a few weeks. Host, what are you planning to bring with you? Mike, just my cell phone. According to Nexus magazine, following that second radio appearance, Mike received over $30,000 in direct donations from listeners, as well as equipment donations worth over $500,000. Then, about a month later, Mike Markham vanished. Completely. without a trace. Online forums erupted with theories. He successfully traveled through time. He died in an accident during the experiment. The time machine failed, and he fled to avoid embarrassment. Not long after his disappearance, a mysterious tip was called into the Art Bell show by an anonymous listener. The caller claimed Mike Markham time-slipped into the 1930s and died there. The caller went on to describe a news story from the 1930s in which an unidentified dead man was found on a California beach. The body was discovered inside a metal tube, along with a strange device. Next to the man was an object that appeared to be a cell phone. Mike Markham traveled to the past and died in an accident. And that is the full story of the disappearance of Mike Markham, time machine builder. What do you think? Did he actually succeed in traveling through time and slip back to 1930? It should be noted, none of this story has been scientifically verified. Please enjoy it purely as a fascinating piece of unexplained history. On the morning of June 30, 1908, at around 7 a.m., an unidentified explosion tore through the dense wilderness near the Tunguska River in Siberia, Russia. It was the largest explosion in recorded human history. Its estimated power, 5 million tons of TNT, at minimum 300, and possibly up to 500 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Some estimates suggest it could have been powerful enough to threaten the survival of our species, had it struck a populated area. At the time, the Tunguska forest was one of the most remote places on Earth. It covered an enormous area, was nearly impossible to access, and had essentially no permanent population, only occasional loggers who came in search of timber. Then, one early morning in June 1908, disaster arrived without warning. The explosion in the upper atmosphere over eastern Siberia was unlike anything humanity had seen. More than 2,000 square kilometers of forest were instantly destroyed. An area equivalent to 100 square miles, roughly 3 times the size of the city of Chicago, was completely leveled. 80 million trees were knocked flat. A train was derailed 450 kilometers away. And in countries thousands of miles across Europe, the explosion created a brief nighttime sky so bright that people could read small print outdoors at midnight, the result of massive clouds of debris reflecting sunlight back to Earth. In Stockholm, nearly 2,500 miles away, it was the middle of the night and people could read a newspaper by the reflected light. The temperature at the epicenter was estimated to reach over 44,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Every animal within dozens of miles was incinerated. Eyewitnesses in the region described what they saw. I was resting on the ground during a break from work. I looked toward the northwest and saw a column of blue fire falling vertically from the sky. It split the sky open. Then came a series of explosions that shook the earth. A black cloud consumed everything above us. The people in our village thought Judgment Day had arrived. They fell to their knees and prayed. What caused it? The obvious first guess was a meteorite impact. That was also the working assumption of the research teams who eventually investigated the site. But in the aftermath of World War I and the Russian Civil War, it took until 1921, 13 years after the event, before a formal expedition could be organized. When the researchers finally arrived, they were met with a sight unlike anything they had anticipated. Millions of trees, all knocked flat and all pointing in the same direction, as if pressed down by a single enormous hand. And not a meteorite fragment anywhere. No crater. Nothing. If it was a meteorite impact, the force of the explosion should have left an enormous impact crater and scattered fragments across a wide area. There was none of that. The theory that gained the most support in the scientific community was a comet impact. Unlike asteroids, which are composed of rock and metal, comets are made of ice and dust. A comet exploding in the upper atmosphere, perhaps 5 to 8 miles up, would release a devastating shockwave without leaving any solid fragments behind. And because comets move faster than asteroids, they generate even greater explosive force. But critics were skeptical. A comet large enough to cause this explosion would have been visible from Earth for weeks before impact. No observatory anywhere in the world reported seeing one. Other hypotheses were proposed over the decades: a miniature black hole passing through the Earth and out the other side, a natural methane gas explosion from underground deposits, an intervention by extraterrestrial intelligence to prevent a catastrophic meteor strike from hitting a populated area, or even secret weapons testing decades before the nuclear age. None of them could be definitively proven. For nearly 100 years, Tunguska remained one of science's most stubborn open questions. Then in 2013, the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences announced a potential breakthrough. Scientists who had been analyzing rock samples collected from the Tunguska site back in 1978 said they had discovered traces of magnetite, a mineral found in meteorites, within the samples. A rocky asteroid appears to have exploded at an altitude of approximately 5 miles above the surface, the team announced. The world's media ran with the headline, "100-year mystery solved, cause was asteroid explosion." But many scientists remained unconvinced. Magnetite is one of many minerals associated with meteorites, but not all magnetite comes from space. And even if this is meteorite material, we can't confirm it's from the 1908 explosion specifically. So what do you believe? Here's something worth considering. If this explosion, one that happened just over 100 years ago, had struck the center of a major city instead of a remote Siberian forest, there might be no city left to speak of. This has been your deep dive into one of the closest calls in human history, the Tunguska explosion. If you have topics you'd like us to cover, or thoughts on today's video, drop them in the comments. And if you enjoyed the content, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. Thank you.